Welcome back to the 5 business rules on how to build an impactful social enterprise. I'm your host, Darrell Coleman, founder and CEO of DC Design. Excited to be here on our 5th episode of 5 in this series, focused on this specific issue. Over the last several days, 5 days, including today, I've been talking to you about these business elements, these business systems, and really mindsets that as a social entrepreneur are helpful for you to embrace if you really want to create lasting and meaningful change in the world. And I want to do a quick recap of what those are, and then I want to talk to you about this 5th one, which is titled the most impactful thing, or possibly one of the most impactful things that you can do. So our very first rule that I gave you on the 5 business rules was money isn't evil. And I talked to you about how it's about how you use it and make it that really matters. I then talked about how as you use it, there are really these 2 parts to it. One is that you should fortify the people that you are working to serve instead of leaving them dependent on you. So that's our second rule, fortify other people. And the third is that in order to use money for good, you should be investing in the people who help provide that value as well, which are your employees. So money isn't evil, rule number 1. Number 2, fortify the people that you're trying to serve instead of leaving them dependent on you. Rule number 3, use the money that you have for good to also invest in your employees. Rule number 4 is recognize that by doing so, you ultimately are multiplying your impact because you are enabling not just the people who are served to receive positive impact, but you're also enabling those you work with to go amplify their impact down the line. And then today we're talking about the 5th rule, which is one of the most important things you can do, and it really revolves around building a viable and lasting social enterprise in the first place. I want to start off by talking about something that most people don't know, which is that our social systems are actually far more expansive than people think they are. We often think of government and we think about the institutions that it runs. We think about it as a thing that manages our roads and our bridges and that facilitates the payment to our police officers and our firefighters and that manages jails and most schools as well. We think of the government funds that flow into all sorts of the systems that we rely on, and we think that is what a social system is all about. But in reality, things are a bit different from that picture. Most governments don't manage social systems alone. Instead, they rely on a network of community-based organizations, both nonprofit and for-profit businesses, in order to consistently provide the services that community needs. This is something that I saw firsthand during my work on criminal justice reform in Santa Clara County. So my team was tasked with helping the county develop their 3-year strategy for jail reentry. And we did that by using our methodology, which is human-centered design. We went out and we spoke with all the stakeholders who were involved in this issue. And many of them on that list would be the ones that you would guess they were. So that's the sheriff and the district attorney and the public defender. And these are people who are paid by governments, right? Local government is paying these individuals. But it turns out that there were a whole bunch of other people we also needed to go talk to. That was people who lead faith-based organizations and people who provide in-jail transition services and people who provide educational services to the people who are incarcerated as well, and people who provide counseling to family members while their family members are in jail, and people who provide counseling to victims of crime. All of these different groups were actually a big part of this system. And we started to see through this work that in reality, the government doesn't stand alone in delivering the services it delivers. It actually works with this network in order to consistently provide the available resources that a community needs in order to remain stable and respond when things get challenging. As I've come to work in more and more cities and counties across America, I have come to see that this reality is true in other places also. Right? So when just thinking about criminal justice itself, we have the departments who are involved in facilitating that, but we also have those who are providing housing for people as they leave jail. We have those who are providing job training for those individuals. We have the people who are who are providing the jobs themselves. We have services that have been created in order to expunge records. And some of these are for-profit and some of these are non-profit, but again, they are part of the social systems that we think about. Even in hiring us, DC Design, to come in and do the work of helping develop this plan, we are a for-profit social impact strategy and design consulting firm. We work with the people who are most impacted by the negative outcomes, the negative flaws in our social systems, right? But we are not a government agency. We're not a government entity, right? And so that is just to paint this picture that you, as a social entrepreneur, as the creator of a social enterprise, actually have a really important role to play in providing the services and the resources needed to make sure that communities can thrive, right? So that's the first point to really land on. The second point to land on is that as a social entrepreneur who fills that role, when you step in to say, I'm going to provide these services, you need to recognize that people are relying on you. And that is a super important responsibility, and one that if you've taken up this mantle of being a social entrepreneur, a social innovator, you've stepped into it because you care about providing those services for people in the first place. You want them to thrive. You want to provide things that aren't being provided. You want to make sure that the least of these, as it's often referred to, right, that everyone has what they need to be able to survive, that no one is left out. But when people are relying on you in that situation, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is our responsibility? And the reality is that when a crisis hits, as we just experienced, for example, in 2020 with a global pandemic, when a crisis hits, the people who are hit the hardest when a uniform crisis hits are the people who have the least. Money stops flowing, in particular, to support the needs of those who were in need, even when the economy was booming. So when 2020 happened and a global pandemic took the world by storm, we saw immediately that money was pulled back from our services, but also from a number of other services that were being offered. It was really hard to make sure that people who were homeless were getting the services that they needed. It was really hard to make sure that women who were fleeing from domestic violence had a place to go. It was really hard to make sure that the services people relied on were still up and running. And we as the entrepreneurs need to recognize that that is our responsibility to start to figure out how we get through that. Something that I recently was reading stated something that I believe is true, and it's worth stating here. Philanthropy is a tax strategy. It is not a business model. And as social entrepreneurs, right, in this series, what I've been talking about are the rules for building a business, right? The business rules for building an impactful social enterprise. As social entrepreneurs who have maybe shied away from money making, who have shied away from that element of it, we need to recognize that the donation piece, right, using donations purely to fund our work, is actually a very inconsistent and often unreliable method of making sure that when things hit the fan, when things become really challenging, that we can continue to provide the services that need to be provided. And so instead, I'm not saying that you shouldn't receive donations. What I'm trying to get across is that knowing how to build a social enterprise that can generate its own funds and survive through its own activity is actually one of the most impactful things that you can do. And the reason for that is everything that I've just said. It is the sustainability that comes from knowing that when things get hard, you can continue to provide the services that are needed most. The most sustainable social impact organizations are the ones that can deliver their impact, rain or shine, economic depression or growth market, if others believe in the vision of the people who are running that organization or not, and building a social enterprise that relies on its own activity to do that is incredibly powerful. Longevity matters, right, in this case. Making it through a hard time, continuing to provide services through that hard time, and then coming out on the other side so that you can keep doing that, you can do the cleanup work, is really important. When I think about the communities that I work with, when I think about one of the biggest things that makes it so challenging to weather hard conditions is the lack of resources in the first place, right? The lack of resources that are stored up in those communities to be able to respond. So when a giant hurricane hits New Orleans, for example, it is the poorest communities that suffer the most. It is the poorest communities who have a hard time ever getting back to where they were. It's the poorest communities that have a hard time fixing up their homes and who have to end up fleeing. And the thing that helps other communities continue to weather that are the resources that they have. As a social entrepreneur who is seeking to build something that can continue to stand the test of time, where you can continue to provide the services you need, where you can continue to improve others' lives, where you can continue to improve your own life, making sure that you have the skills needed to accrue those resources, right, to be able to weather what's coming is incredibly impactful. It's one of the most impactful things you can do, not just for yourself, but for others as well. So that is the 5 business rules for building an impactful social enterprise. That is what this series has been about. If you found this helpful, please do leave a comment. I would love to know what you thought of the series. If you disagree with what I'm talking about here, I would love to hear from you on that as well, and we can talk that out. I welcome differing perspectives on all this. This is what I have developed as my perspective from my work. And I just went through the pandemic with a company that employs 6 people, and we've now come through our hardest year in known history, and we are positioned to be stronger and more impactful than we've ever been, right? Because on the other side of that pendulum swing is all the work that needs to be done. And I for one am really happy that we are here and that we were stable and that we were able to do that. And the reason that we've been able to do that is because we've responded to this realization that we need to be able to generate the funds we use to operate from our own activity in order to provide services that are really important. So anyway, I would love to hear your perspective. I'm coming from my own perspective, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you'd like to hear more episodes like this. I'd also love to hear from you. If you've got an idea for an episode or something that you want to know more about, or if I explain something and you want me to go deeper into that, I'm always looking for more content ideas that come directly from the people who would benefit from hearing about them. All right, that's what I've got for you on this series. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Social Impact Live. I will see you then.